Kia ora, I'm Tom Kitchen, and today on The Detail, a tale of two cities and their leaders. Just after the Wellington and Auckland councils were elected in October 2022, this is what we were hearing.
Just 1 week into the job, Auckland Mayor Wayne Brown is shunning the public eye by screening texts, calls and taking the weekend off.
But some of his councillors are speaking out. Ructions are already forming even before council's first meeting.
Wellington has said they've proven that they're ready for change. That they're ready for progressive solutions.
We were warned about Wayne when he got abusive and refused to speak to journalists. Tory was to be a breath of fresh air. Could anyone have predicted what happens next?
Mayor Wayne Brown says Auckland will have the lowest rates increase this year of any metropolitan council in the country.
Let's get into the negative.
Typical.
You're here just a couple of weeks after 3 left-wing councillors seriously criticised your leadership. One of them stood with you on the stage the night you were elected, cuddling, holding your hand, saying, yes, this is all new, this is fantastic. Now he wants no part in the direction of your leadership. All 3 of these councillors believe you have betrayed your progressive values.
2 journalists whose writing is tightly wound around their cities join me today for a mid-term report card on Mayors Wayne Brown and Tory whānau. Is it a case of one starting terribly and turning it all around, then vice versa for the other, or is it a bit more complicated? Simon Wilson, kia ora, welcome to The Detail. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Tom.
Simon is a senior writer for the New Zealand Herald in Auckland. As for his relationship with the Mayor...
I like to think that my relationship was straightforward with Wayne and his was complicated with me.
Okay.
That prick Simon Wilson, he's been at me for all year long. And the first thing I do when I get to be the mayor, they'll be gluing little pictures of him on all the urinals so everyone can pee on them.
From day one, he said I was an angry old white man, which is a pretty good description of him, actually.
On the campaign trail, a couple of years ago, he didn't like the nature of the questioning that I and Todd Nile and some other journalists were putting to him. We wanted to know what he really planned to do for the city. We wanted to know how he thought his experience, which wasn't big in local body politics, fitted in.
He had been mayor in the far north.
He had been mayor in the far north, and he'd had 2 terms there. First term he'd swept into power, and the second term he was swept back out again. So, there were questions from the far north about why the population there had turned on him. There were a whole lot of questions we had. He didn't like that. His view was that he was here to fix Auckland. That was his slogan. And pesky media getting in the way wasn't really going to be part of that. That kind of carried through into his time in office, where he rapidly gained a reputation for being a testy sort of person to work with.
Simon even went on Morning Report, talking about the Mayor's prickly relationship with the media and questioned his ability to deal with a crisis.
The more experience Wayne Brown gets talking to media when we're not actually in a crisis, the better prepared he will be when the day comes, because it will come.
And then 2 days later or 3 days later we had the Auckland floods.
That's exactly right.
While Auckland Mayor Wayne Brown is facing calls to resign over his leadership during the flooding, critics say he hasn't been seen enough in public.
Wayne Brown didn't cover himself in glory. He jumped the wrong way. He seemed to be startled by the events. They took place over a weekend, and he'd made it clear that he didn't really think he should be working weekends a month or so earlier.
Yeah, he should be playing tennis with his mates instead of talking to the media drongos.
Yeah.
A leaked text reported by the New Zealand Herald yesterday revealed Mr Brown was still planning a game of tennis as the flooding kicked off on Friday, and complained that he had to cancel to, quote, deal with media drongos.
That was a low point, I think, in Wayne Brown's mayoralty. And he still says it's not my job to be empathetic and give people a hug, and it's my job to sort out problems.
Didn't go and hug people. I'm not a hugger.
His job's both of them, actually. And it's something he's always struggled to understand. But he has, from that point, applied himself far more diligently to the task.
Well, let's see where we're at now. So we've had the long-term plan come through. That's kind of the big focus of the term, right, for councillors.
His budget process is fascinating. What has normally happened in Auckland under his 2 predecessors, Len Brown and then Phil Goff, who were both extremely experienced politicians, was that they would develop a budget out of their office, they would work out the numbers, they would get a budget that they knew they could get enough support for, and they would put those things through. Wayne Brown had a different approach, which was, this is what I want to do, and let's put it on the table and see who's going to vote for it. In 2023, That went really badly for him in the annual plan because he put up a budget that involves selling airport shares and a bunch of other things that were strongly opposed by many people. The debate was extremely bitter.
In the interest of being constructive and not wishing to be a drongo, financially illiterate or a dipshit, I welcome the opportunity to safely express our preferences.
Finally, he got a set of proposals passed that were not very close to what he wanted, but they weren't really what anybody wanted. I've never seen a council come out of that process so bitter and divided. There were councillors in tears. It really was a wretched performance.
In his second year in office, he had to develop a 10-year plan, and he changed tack a bit.
He did more work with councillors. He had developed stronger relations with councillors by that stage. He had worked out who was going to support him and who wasn't, who was likely to. He had a probably more functional mayor's office by that stage, and that meant that the process of establishing the long-term plan budget, the 10-year budget, was smoother. He didn't get everything he wanted, but he got a much stronger sense of we, the council, are committed to this.
And the rates increases that we've seen haven't been overly huge like other parts of the country.
Rates in Auckland will increase by 6.8% this year.
He has kept his rates increases under 10%, which is an enormous achievement in the country at the moment. There are very few other councils, certainly of the major councils, and many of the smaller ones who've managed to do that. He has had a strong sense of it's painful and we're going to share the pain around, so he hasn't carved out and eliminated whole areas of council activity. He's trimmed and trimmed and trimmed, and in quite literal senses sometimes. The grass in the playing fields doesn't get trimmed quite as low as it used to. In other words, it doesn't get done as often and those sorts of things.
I mean, you think that ratepayers would be pretty happy with that?
You would, yes, and I suspect ratepayers will be. That's one of the strengths of Brown, that he has been able to do it. The other thing that's been really interesting to watch is that he was elected with a campaign team around him who were closely associated with the National Party, people like Tim Hurdle, Matthew Hooton, who organised his campaign, ran it very successfully. They came up with the Fix Auckland slogan, those sorts of things. But they moved on until very recently. Brown's Chief of Staff was associated with the Labour Party. He has good working relationships with Leslie Simpson, who is national, but also with some senior councillors like Richard Hills, chair of the Planning Committee, and Shane Henderson, who is also a kind of rising star, if you like, at council, and they're Labour. It turned out for Wayne that the people he could rely on to get things done, and he's always said that, he's always said, I'm not particularly political, I'll look to the people who are functional, competent, and are going to be able to work with me. It turned out that those people tended to be more Labour than anything else. It's not that he's a Labour mayor, I'm not trying to say that, but he has found support for his program, and he's found that the people he can work with have tended to be on the centre-left rather than the centre-right. So the people like Maurice Williamson, who ex-National Cabinet Minister, who's now a councillor, who had thought he was going to be instrumental, or seemed to have thought he was going to be instrumental in the Auckland Council. Williamson is not often in the majority when it comes to voting. It's quite interesting that change.
Okay. He's got these kind of successes under his belt. Do you still feel he lacks a certain emotional intelligence?
I think emotional intelligence would be our mayor's weak suit, for sure. He cannot help himself. He sits in council meetings and just sort of quietly manages to say things about other councillors that, if they were sensitive, they'd feel highly abused about.
He criticised some of his councillors, calling them not financially literate.
This is the real big test for Wayne Brown. He hasn't fixed Auckland. He hasn't done anything to reduce the number of road cones, which became a kind of signal issue in his campaign.
Was that what was meant by fixing Auckland?
Well, fixing road cones was part of it, but he was going to fix Auckland. You remember that?
What does that mean?
Well, this is going back to that question of, his testy relationship with media in the campaign. Nobody could really work out what it meant because he only spoke in the broadest generalities about it. But Auckland isn't fixed in any significant way over what it was. There is a proposal now to reduce the number of road cones, in other words, to revise the traffic management programs that are required when work's done on our streets. That's a good idea, but that's coming from central government. That's not coming from local government.
What do you think his relationship with the government is like, and government ministers?
Wayne Brown's relationship with Simeon Brown in particular, who is the Minister for Local Government, the Minister for Transport and the Minister for Auckland, is hard to read. They very rarely do anything together. They don't appear to have much to say about each other. And reading between the lines, it doesn't look as if the government is taking a great deal of notice of what Wayne Brown might like them to do. My suspicion is that actually there is not a working relationship, but we're going to find that out relatively soon, I expect, because this whole question of an integrated transport plan, which Wayne Brown's very keen on, his idea of what should be in it is very different from the government's.
Although Winston Peters seems to be a fan after Brown, the engineer, correctly diagnosed the faults behind the Northland pylon failure when 10,000 homes lost power.
He said the bolts are not in their plates. This is a terrible tragedy, he said. And 4 hours later, they were confessing that what Mayor Brown was saying was true.
He's kind of good like that, in the sense that he says, I'm an engineer, I know how to look at these things. And if you go to a place where there's a problem, what happens is he'll get out a bit of paper and he'll draw you a diagram of what it looks like and what it should have looked like, and this is why the road fell away here, or this is why the bridge didn't do that. On those issues, he knows what he's talking about. On the other hand, that's not necessarily the mayor's role. The mayor's role is to lead rather than be the technical engineer on a job.
But he said that he's more solutions-focused rather than feelings-focused, right? He doesn't pretend to be this empathetic guy.
Well, if you're good at empathy, you're good at team building, you're good at relationships. I mean, you can boil Wayne Brown's situation now down to one thing. He has to have a good working relationship with the government, and in particular with Simeon Brown, who has very determined ideas of his own, in order to get the progress that he thinks should happen and the council thinks should happen for the city. So his job is to persuade the government of that. If he wants to do that, he's going to need considerably more empathy skills, considerably more negotiating skills than he's shown us so far. For all intents and purposes, most of what he wants to do are good things. And that wasn't clear before the election, but it's more or less clear now. But his ability to actually do them is stymied by his inability to build working relationships with people.
What's wrong with his straight-talking, kind of straight and narrow, this is what I think kind of approach that he's used in media interviews?
This is just sensible. Stop trying to find silly reasons.
It's my job to find silly reasons, you know that.
Just going to guess you walk into a room and sit down with Simeon Brown and tell him he's a fool. That's not going to get you very far.
And I mean, I remember Sharon Brett Kelly, our co-host, doing this podcast, comparing Tory whānau and Wayne Brown and their media approach.
We thought we'd have a go ourselves at getting that elusive interview, and surprise, surprise.
Hello?
Hi, is this Wayne?
Who's that?
Hi, Wayne. This is Bonnie calling from RNZ's The Detail podcast. How are you?
Can't talk to you.
Hello?
When Wayne Brown started his term, you were on a whole lot of radio stations talking about how hard it was to get an interview with Wayne Brown.
Morning reporters asked Mr. Brown for an interview every day this week, but we've been turned down.
Have you got an interview with Wayne Brown?
Yes, I have. Oh, yes. So I got an interview with him after his first year. The door's open again for me to do it again. So he's changed in that sense. I go to lots and lots of council meetings, and Wayne Brown will come and have a chat all the time, and it's not just me, it's the other journalists too. I think the jury's really still out on the legacy Wayne Brown will leave us. He's about to turn 78, I think. We don't know if he's going to stand again, but I think the jury is still out on what he will have given this city. He won't have fixed it by the end of his term.
Well, he's nearly old enough to run for US president, isn't he?
Just about is.
I thought we were in confidential. My humble apologies for that. It was a Biden moment.
Now to the capital. Georgina Campbell is the Herald's Wellington Issues reporter. She takes me back to Tory whānau's win in 2022.
It was an absolute landslide for her. The campaign is interesting to go from an unknown to a landslide victory.
Yeah, so what was she promising to do as mayor during that campaign?
She had a vision for Wellington, which I think is a clear distinction from the people who she was running against. So Tory Whānau's vision was basically a vibrant city with good public transport, with higher density housing, one that was mindful of climate change.
She's the leader I want.
She's badass.
I'm going to be quite willing to be quite bold when it comes to decision making.
I'm putting myself forward to be your mayor because I have the solutions, the experience and the passion to get things done.
I think her win came down to three things: that broader vision, secondly, that green machine. So the Green Party endorsed her as a candidate. There is an incredible resource that becomes available to Tory. Thirdly, Tory wasn't tainted by being a part of previous councils. She sort of pitched herself as someone who was young, progressive and energetic.
So do you think she's lived up to those promises so far as mayor?
This is a hard question to answer because a lot has changed. So her flagship policy, which she announced at her campaign launch, was to deliver this new major urban revitalisation project between Wellington's waterfront and the hospital. So, she was talking about lots of new, warm, energy-efficient housing, playgrounds, commercial spaces. And she said that this proposed development would take place along the preferred light rail route to Island Bay. So she was making this promise when Let's Get Wellington Moving, that beleaguered transport plan that everybody loves to hate, was still in play. Unfortunately for Tory Whānau, one of the first things the National-led government did when it got to power was cancel Let's Get Wellington Moving.
Everyone is just exhausted by the ongoing back and forth over Let's Get Wellington Moving. I think there's a recognition, frankly, that it's been a bit of a disaster.
That sort of poured cold water on her key promise. The Let's Get Wellington Moving situation has also caused problems for her vision for a more vibrant city centre, specifically Wellington's Golden Mile. Under Let's Get Wellington Moving, the plan was to remove private cars from that section of the city, create more space for parks and pedestrians, cyclists and buses. Now, the council managed to negotiate to bring that project in-house when Let's Get Wellington Moving was cancelled. But the council was facing a lot of financial constraints. So the Courtney Place section is going to be done first, and then the Lambton Quay section will be done later. So it's now sort of happening in phases. So that's made it more difficult for her, but she's managed to cling on to it. There are some promises that people may not remember that have been kept, like increasing social grants for safety initiatives in the CBD by $500,000 a year. But I think the interesting thing about Tory Whānau is not so much what she promised on the campaign trail and whether those promises were kept or not, but it's the things that she didn't campaign on that she has ended up spending a lot of political capital on.
Such as?
Such as Reading Cinema.
Oh, I was going to ask you about that.
Yeah, you can't talk about Tory Whānau and Wellington City Council without mentioning Reading Cinema, can you?
Good old Wellington back in the news as the council pulls the plug on this Reading Cinema deal. So the council would buy the land under the cinema for $32 million so the owners could pay to renovate the building, with the option for them to buy it back for the same price 10 years down the track. That's all off now, forget that.
This building was shut in 2019 due to an earthquake risk, and it's become an eyesore on Courtney Place. It's a huge building, it has a massive presence in a really key part of the city, and it's just boarded up. It really does look horrible. So Tory Whānau championed this deal that was designed by council officials for the council to buy the land underneath the building for $32 million, money which the cinema's multi-millionaire owners would then use to redevelop the site.
Yep.
And of course, this sparked a fierce debate over whether the plan was visionary, maybe as Tory Whānau would like it to be seen as, or corporate welfare. And in the end, this deal unravelled. Council staff killed it. They said they couldn't get the best possible outcomes for Wellingtonians. And Tory Whānau sort of indicated that this was going to be her win. Reading Cinema, bringing that back to life, getting it back open, it was almost going to be her legacy or her thing that people would remember her for. Never campaigned on it. It just went so sour. And because she championed it so hard, she just spent a lot of political capital on something that Wellingtonians, it just left a really bitter taste for them, I think. I should note too, Tom, the other thing to talk about in terms of contentious things that Tory whānau didn't campaign on is the council's airport shares.
It's a departure from the norm. Wellington set to have the country's first major airport in full private ownership. The City Council voting to sell its minority share, with the Mayor saying the money's needed to prepare for a disaster.
She has championed this. So Wellington City Council has a 34% share in Wellington Airport. It was last estimated to be worth $278 million, those shares. The narrative around why these shares needed to be sold has kind of changed a little bit in my view. It's sort of morphed from needing to diversify the council's investment portfolio to mitigating the council's large insurance gap to actually, if we don't do this, we're going to need to cut hundreds of millions of dollars in capital expenditure from the budget. Tory whānau got the sale across the line, which was impressive. It's not easy. Asset sales are obviously just inherently difficult and divisive due to, I think, the ideological reasons behind them. But the interesting thing is that since she managed to get enough numbers around the table to go ahead with the sale, the situation has soured to the extent that if the same vote was held today, she'd no longer have the numbers for it. So at the moment, the council is selling the airport shares, but it could, come December, it could be all off the table again.
Meanwhile, there's been talk of Wellington getting in commissioners to take over, calls for whānau to resign, and some of her support on the left is deserting her over cuts the council has been forced to make just to keep the rates rise to 16.9%. And then there have been the personal struggles, more than just being told off for bringing her dog into the office.
Wellington Mayor Tory whānau has admitted she has a drinking problem after another incident of drunken behaviour in public.
Now, this is not the first time that the mayor has been caught behaving like this in public. There was a similar incident about 6 months ago.
The low light for Tory whānau, of course, I think is her drinking problem and the way that it played out so publicly. This issue played out over a 6-month spiral, and her drinking and love of a night out has long been a point of conversation since she took the mayoral chains. In June last year, she kind of was like leaning into this criticism that she was a party lover. She said, I'm 40, I'm single. She loved the city's hospitality scene, loved to go out with her mates. And, she said at that point she was entitled to a private life. And then just 1 month later, it emerged that she was visibly intoxicated one night at the Old Quarter, to the point staff considered not serving her, and then she forgot to pay the bill. So she strenuously denied claims about drunken behaviour, including asking a waiter, do you know who I am, after being cut off. A month on from that, whānau is saying, I'm no longer going to go out on a Friday night. She's been through a process of mourning her private life, and she's realised now that, she needs to keep certain socialising within the parameters of her home. And when she leaves her home, she belongs to the public. And then at the end of last year, she admitted to having a drinking problem and she's sought professional help. Some people questioned whether she was up to the job, including Councillor Nicola Young, who said Tory whānau wasn't well, there was no easy cure, and went as far as calling for her to resign.
It's not easy to overcome alcoholism, and I think, she needs to walk away.
Next came her revelation she had an ADHD and autism diagnosis.
But I think she sees, this diagnosis is quite positive for her. She feels that a lot of things have actually fallen into place as to why she thinks a certain way.
Yeah, so she's obviously had a lot of struggles politically and personally, right? But she's also been applauded for some of the things that she has done, like around the Loafers Lodge fire.
Found out around about 6:30am that there had indeed been fatalities, which nobody wants. It's the worst outcome. My heart goes out to the families impacted by this.
Yeah, she was there on the scene. She made herself available to media. She was visibly emotional. You could see how it had affected her and her connection with the city. She showed very good leadership that day.
So do you feel like she likes the job and she wants another go at it next time round?
She has always maintained that she wants to do 3 terms as mayor, which I think a lot of people might be surprised by, because irrespective of whether you like her or not, or you agree with her policies, I think everybody can acknowledge that it's been kind of a tough time for her, personally and just as a human being. But no, she is quite resolute in that she wants to do this job for, not just another term, for 3 terms. But of course, ultimately that will be up for voters to decide.
That's it for today. The Detail is a newsroom production supported by RNZ and NZ On Air. Today's episode was engineered by Alex Harmer. It was produced by Alexia Russell and Davina Zimmer. Thanks to Simon Wilson and Georgina Campbell. I'm Tom Kitchen. Ka kite anō.